What happens every Thursday, boys and girls? Well, every Thursday here on the Newsmaker Show, we welcome to our microphones, courtesy of the telephone system, from Boulder, Colorado. He's home in his base operations now. Dr. Chris Kopff, University of Colorado, professor extraordinaire, and always an interesting guest.
It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA. Here's Kevin Torres.
Okay, Chris Kopff, you're back in Boulder after traveling all over, giving lectures, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, I'm sitting here watching the lovely rain descend here, pretending I'm in Seattle.
You know, that must not...
rain here in the summer, so it's a big deal.
That must not be... maybe I'll tick off some people here. That must not be a wonderful place to live because it rains so much.
Seattle, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, it's all. You have to get used to it. You have to have a positive disposition because here in Boulder, you wake up almost every day, except for 30 a year. It's sunny. So even if you're depressed, you walk outside and you feel better. Mm-hmm. Seattle is the opposite. It rains a little bit almost every day, except maybe 30. And so if you're a depressed person, you wake up and the first thing you see is it's cloudy and rainy and, oh dear, I'm going to go back to bed, right?
Well, okay, now, last week we talked about Blaise Pascal, Frenchman, 17th century. You were right. I was wrong. I had him in the 1700s.
The next century along with, yeah.
Yeah, he was in the 1600s. And who was the other guy?
William of Ockham.
William of Ockham, right. And they came up with two things that have lasted down through the centuries that everyone should be aware of, I think. Let's start with Occam. What was Occam's razor?
Occam was a Franciscan monk and philosopher who lived in the 14th century, and he argued that the simplest explanation was usually the best explanation. The more complicated an explanation, the more likely that one of the parts of it was wrong, and so the whole thing was wrong. The simpler the explanation, the more likely that there were fewer parts to be wrong. And so he argued very simply that you go for the simplest explanation, and that, in a word, is you don't. His technical term in his own day was you do not multiply entities without necessity. But logically, the meaning was you accept the simplest explanation over a more complicated one.
Okay, Occam's razor. Now, let's get to Pascal's wager. Did I say it right? Razor? Wager?
That's right. If we were having this debate with Mel Blanc and he was doing, Elmer Fudd, we'd have a terrible problem here.
Okay, now let's get to
no.
Blaise Pascal, Frenchman, 1600s. Died rather young, as I recall. All right, go ahead.
He was an important mathematician, an important Christian writer whose work, the thoughts, the pensées, are very brilliant. And he argued, he was one of the people who helped develop the research on probability and statistics. And he argued, if you go on statistics, you should believe in God, because if you don't believe in God and you're right, you get nothing. If you do believe in God and you're right, you get heaven and an eternity of bliss. And by the way, if you do believe in God and there is no God, you get the same thing as a guy who doesn't believe in God, that is nothing. So the odds are in favor of your going for what will give you an eternity of bliss as opposed to nothing.
Okay, that's for those of you who didn't hear the show last week. And we had someone said, have him re-explain that. So we did. Okay. Occam and Pascal.
In terms of statistics that we all believe in nowadays, that this is unanswerable because it gives infinity plus against infinity zero, and the odds are always better for infinity plus over infinity zero.
Well, if you say so, I'm not going to fight about that because I was not good at math.
We've already made our bet, so.
All right, now let's move along. The Democrats, and I have to give them credit. I really do give them credit. Especially Harry Reid. He can look so somber and so serious. He's the Senate Majority Leader. You'll see him if you watch the news. He's on there almost every night. They're saying that the Republicans are going to impeach Obama, and I'm sure there are some people, Democrats and Republicans, who would like to impeach Obama, but that's not on the agenda for the Republicans. They're doing it to raise money, and they've raised several $1 million by sending out letters and emails saying, if the Republicans get control of the Congress this year, they're going to impeach Barack. And that somber fellow from Nevada, I guess they say Nevada, Harry Reid stood there Tuesday night, I guess it was, and he said, well, the American people, I can't do his voice.
No, nobody can.
Can't. It's something like this. The American people are shocked that the Republicans are out there getting ready to impeach Obama. So Boehner has to get out and say, no, we're not going to impeach the guy. No, we're not, because they're raising all kinds of money with it. Very clever. They are clever. You have to give them that.
No, they are very good marketers. And the president, if you view him as a fundraiser, is the most successful of all American presidents.
Yeah, well, why is he raising money? What's he going to do with that money?
Well, he basically hopes he can. Everyone knows that the Republicans are going to do well in the fall elections because the out party always does. What he wants to do is to hold it to a minimum, so that they get nowhere near 60 votes in the Senate, and so that the House stays more or less the way it is. And he believes that he can do that. He knows he's going to lose a bunch of state houses, but governorships and things. But he wants to make sure that he can still, keep on doing what he's doing now, which is basically governing by presidential decree.
Now, your friend and mine, Robert Heinemann, who's not pushing for impeachment, but he said there is one thing, if they can prove it, which would clearly be an impeachable offense. Doesn't mean they do it, because it doesn't work very well. I mean, Bill Clinton was out there lying, and they got him for tampering with evidence. I don't know.
Yeah. He was disbarred from the federal bar because of his perjury, and yet he was not impeached.
Right, and they learned their lesson.
He was not convicted. I'm sorry, he was impeached. He was not convicted.
Not convicted, right. And they've learned from that. Don't try to impeach a sitting president. It doesn't pay off. Even if it's a guy like Obama, whose approval rating now is down to 28% in some polls. That's where Bush was for those wars he got us into. Now, where was I going with this? Chris?
You were saying that Heinemann felt...
Heinemann says there is, right. Heinemann says there is something. Do you remember that little Egyptian guy out in California?
Right, who did the video.
Who did the video that nobody saw, that didn't cause any trouble anywhere. And they went in there and grabbed that guy and threw him in jail for a year when, the evidence indicates, they knew perfectly well he wasn't responsible for what happened at Benghazi.
Sure.
Now, according to Heinemann, that would be and you know something, if it's not an impeachable offense, it ought to be that a president can throw somebody in jail.
In jail.
Yeah. I don't think he even had a trial, did they? They just put him in the slammer for a year.
That's the future, and Hillary was also part of that. So remember, that is not only what Obama's doing now, but what Hillary is not going to have Obama's subtle, detailed constitutional conscience. You can't tell, Marge, I'm being sarcastic.
I don't think that Hillary is ever going to be the president. I just am convinced that she will not be. Now, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I just don't think so. We've got to remember there are a lot of people who remember how corrupt the Clintons are, but there are a lot of people who just look at her as an old lady. You talk to your kids in class. I'll bet you they don't really care about her. They're looking for somebody new. Enter the gal from Massachusetts. And she's more radical than Obama. And that's who Obama's going to be supporting, according to Ed Klein. We have to take a break. When we get back, we'll continue talking with Dr. Chris Kopff. We're back with Dr. Chris Kopff, University of Colorado. I told Chris when we started, just before we started the show, I want to start a new feature with him every week. Ask him who are the most important people in the last 150 years in terms of their effect on society. Now, I know one of them he's going to say, Karl Marx. And you told us this years ago, and I never thought about it till you said it, and you were dead on. So talk to me about Karl Marx, then we'll move on to somebody else.
Good, but let me make the point that the most influential people in the 20th and 21st century lived in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Now, one of these people did live on to the 20th century. We'll talk about him in a minute. But when you mention Karl Marx is a 19th century figure. He had a PhD in classics. He seems to be everything that would be irrelevant. But he's the person who said you have to judge things by their economic output. And even people who are anti-Marxist and don't like communism and don't like socialism still agree that we don't judge things by their ethical standards. We don't judge things by their effect on free institutions or on religion. We judge them by their economic output. And whenever we try and bring up ethical issues, we have our friends at Fox News and Fox Business all stand up and say, no, we have to judge it by its economic output. And that is what Karl Marx did, and that's the influence he had on basically almost everybody. So that our political discussions, our other discussions, are based on economic, not on religious, ethical, or political standards.
Now, ever since you told me that, and that's been a couple of years ago, when I watch the news or read the paper, I noticed it now. I don't think I noticed it before. Whatever happens, whether it's a storm or somebody running for office, what does it matter what, they always bring up the economic impact of it, don't they?
Yes, absolutely right. And so, by the way, sometimes this leads to interesting reporting. The Stuart Varney show, Stuart covers a whole range of issues, but he always relates it to economics. He talks about religion. He talks about sports. It's a full news show in one sense. On the other hand, he always relates it to the economy because that's what the leaders of our society do. And when they have many ordinary Americans are worried about the future of the rule of law. The people who run our country sort of sigh in an exasperated way. Why do they bring up this silly stuff? The important thing is, what is the effect that it, in this case immigration, has on the economy, not what is the effect it has on the rule of law, because they believe in the Marxist view that the economy is fundamental and basic, and everything else is superficial.
And you're saying that prior to Marx, people would look at it from the ethical, religious, or what effect it had on people ordinarily,
yes,
rather than the economics.
Freedom, it could be questions of religious fulfillment, it could be situations of vocation. One of the big changes we've seen is people used to talk about vocations. Now we talk about jobs. It used to be, what do you do that makes your life fulfilled and allows you to contribute to society? We never talk about that. We just say it's a job. What effect does it have on jobs? And when you turn vocation, which is about you contributing in a self-fulfilling way to the public good, or a job, which is you getting something done for money. And it's always about jobs, and it's never about vocation.
Okay, we'll move on to another one because we're just rehashing what you said about Marx. But that is such an important point, very salient. All right, now go ahead. Pick me some other guy or gal from the 19th century or the 20th that you feel has had a profound effect upon the way we live and society in general.
Well, there are two others, so let me pick on Charles Darwin, because, again, whether or not you agree with Darwin, it used to be that the coherence of the world, the way it made sense, the way everything works together, was proof that somebody must have organized things, and the burden of proof was on the person who argued that it was random. And there were these people like Lucretius in the ancient world who argued that. Darwin turned the argument around so that now you have to assume that what has happened because of randomness, and the burden of proof is on people who argue that our world makes sense and nature works and ethics work because there is a designer. And that was an incredible change where the burden of proof shifted from those who argue that although the world seemed to make sense, it actually was random. Now the burden of proof is on those of us who argue that the world was designed.
I know of a case, it's not nearby here, so don't try to guess, but I know of a case where a guy applied for a job in a university that had nothing at all to do with Darwinism, or the creationists. It had nothing to do with it at all. But he was quizzed on those points. And had he been dumb enough to say, well, yeah, I believe in God, he would not have had the job. That was at the university level.
Absolutely right.
And that, I'm sure you find that where you are.
The junior faculty who are Christians all say, I'm never going to admit what I believe until I get tenure. They say it in so many words. If you want to know where there's no freedom of speech, come to a university campus, and you'll be dying to visit Qatar and Saudi Arabia after that, because people who believe, people of faith, people with even moderate liberal, not even conservative views, but moderate liberal views, are afraid to express their views because they know that the rule here is very strict. And if you believe in God, you are not an intellectual and you have no place at university.
We haven't got time for your third one. Just tell us who it is, and we'll pick it up next week, God willing.
That would be Sigmund Freud, and he did live in the 20th century.
Okay, Freud.
And that's allow us to talk about sex next week.
Yeah, oh, dear. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Christian Kopff, Christian Kopff, University of Colorado. We get more comments on your program than any other. People really love what you have to say, even if they don't agree with you, but I don't know what they disagree with, frankly. Thank you, Chris. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.